Hello, so glad you could join me this week. I hope you're liking what you're hearing on A Breath of Fresh Air. Please do let me know if there's someone special that you'd like me to interview. And if you feel like doing me a favour, I'd be so grateful if you could rate and review the show for me on your favourite podcast platform. Anyway, enough of that. Let's move on to our very special guest today. He's someone you all know because of one massive chart topper that he had way back in 1971. Of course, he has had other hits and he's crafted a very handsome body of work. But this song was so big that it was voted to be in the top 5 of the best songs ever. Can you guess what the song is? It's not White Christmas by Bing Crosby or This Land Is Your Land by Woody Guthrie. The artist, of course, is singer-songwriter Don McLean, whose life was changed forever when that long-winding composition went straight to number 1 and propelled itself into the heart of popular culture for decades on end. So who is this man who wrote this anthem? And what was his life like before, during and after it? I wanted to find out.
I've been quite busy, actually, running hither and yon.
I want to take you right back to where it all started for you and build up to present day, because there's quite a bit to talk about. If you can cast your mind back to that first album that you released called Tapestry, it was a very special time going on then, wasn't it? Can you describe the era that it was and what led to that album?
Well, I had a manager. I first knew him in the mid-'60s. So he was trying to make deals for the first album that I was working on in 67, 68, around there. And that was the Tapestry album. And in the world out there, there were riots going on in Berkeley, California, and a lot of upheaval in the country, rioting in the streets and cities being set on fire. And in all that while, he knew how to do things, but he was a very idiosyncratic individual. He was very arrogant, and he also was very ignorant of some things. And in all that while, he's trying to get a record company. So anyway, he kept blowing one deal after another, and it was infuriating me. And finally, we found some money and went out and started working on this record. And where did we go but to Berkeley, California? So we're in the middle of rioting every day making this record. Musicians would come to the studio having been tear gassed by the riots in the street, and then they'd start to play, castles in the air. That is sort of a little bit of the background. There was tremendous financial insecurity, and there was in my world, and it was because of this guy, and there was tremendous political insecurity in the country. And it was major. Nothing like it have I ever seen ever since, no matter what. We've never seen anything like it, in spite of all the things you read about today. So the album, 5 visits out there, I guess, and finally it was finished. And a little record label released the album and paid all the bills, and this time it was over $20,000, and $20,000 back in 1969 was
huge. Yeah.
A lot of money. So this ridiculous manager had already gotten me in debt for $20,000, and I'd just gotten out of college like a year ago. By the skin of our teeth, we got out of this, and it turns out that a great record man named Alan Livingston, who had been the source of all the power at Capitol Records, was starting this independent little company. We had beautiful offices on Sunset Boulevard. I was in heaven. I couldn't believe this had happened. So it was all working. The album came out, and I was always doing promotion for it. I was going with independent promotion men all the time in their cars, going to meeting program directors.
Radio stations and the like, yeah.
And what happened was that the album, really, it was a hit. It started getting played on underground radio.
It was played so much that the title track Tapestry became the inspiration for the formation of the Greenpeace environmental movement.
I was on my way. Now I was headlining nightclubs and doing college concerts, and I was extremely busy, starting from 1968 when I got out of college till today.
You must have had an awful lot of confidence about you to support yourself producing that first album. You knew that's what you wanted to do. Did you have any doubt that you'd become successful, or you were pretty cocksure of yourself?
I had no plan B, but I was not going to fail. That's all there is to it. If I had to kill somebody, I think I would do it in order to succeed at that point in my life. I was not going to be denied the ability to make recordings. And I was very, very, very focused on that. It was just me. I had no desire to get married or have a family, although I did get married in 1969, but I don't even know why I did it. I think I was lonely. It was just a dumb thing that I did. And I just didn't think about anything but music and singing. And I was able to make, a fairly decent living performing in nightclubs. And they had given me a contract for 3 years, publishing contract. So I had the record deal, but I also had a publishing agreement with them. And they paid, I think, $300 a week for 3 years. And I was able to give that to my mother. We had lived in a little house in New Rochelle, New York, which you may be aware of if you know anything about my history. And in 1963, when I made my first attempt at college, my mother left the house and rented it. So I had no home to go back to. I had a one-room apartment, which was hers. And basically the message was, well, you're on your own, It was tough. It wasn't easy. 7 years we lived in that apartment. And so in 1970, when I got that publishing agreement, I gave her the money and she moved back into the house. And that's where she stayed until she passed away in 1984.
Don, that first album, the single off it was Castles in the Air, but it also contained the song And I Love You So, which became a number one for Perry Como a couple of years later.
Yes, but there were songs on there like Magdalene Lane, which is about Los Angeles, and that was like the first effort on my part to write in a quasi-American Pie style of songwriting. There was Tapestry about the environment, and there was a song like General Store, which was interesting dialogue about racism, which ended up influencing a lot of young. There were a lot of other songs on that record that are worthy, but those two, ended up being two of my best-known songs.
So there was certainly no shortage of fodder for you to write about during those crazy times, was there?
It depended on what you wanted to do. I mean, I didn't want to write songs, let's say, like And I Love You So, which Johnny Mathis, and who I love, by the way, and let's say Andy Williams would want to sing. But I was very interested in that genre of music, so I wrote And I Love You So in that style. But at the same token, I didn't want to be a Phil Oakes. I didn't want to be a guy who was a firebrand writing only songs about politics. There are quite a few folks around doing that. So I mixed it up. Basically, the first album established the footprint and the style of album making that I would use for the next 20 records.
Was there a problem pigeonholing you as a result of that? Did the radio stations, were they unsure of how to use you?
Well, as I say, the FM radio stations played the whole record. One time I came home to visit my mother, and I turned the radio on and I called her into the room. I said, look, they're playing the whole record in New York City. And that was an amazing moment. That record had caused me so much grief, and it was so hard. All those trips out to California, and meanwhile I'm hanging around all these druggies from the Grateful Dead and all the rest of this, stuff I didn't like. And interestingly enough, at the same time, in the early 60s, I had befriended a guy named Erik Darling who had been in the Weavers. And when I knew him, this is before all the stuff that I've just told you about, this was 62. And right around then, he had a number one record with Walk Right In. He formed this group called the Rooftop Singers. I would go visit him in New York when I was 16 years old, and he was going on the road every weekend playing these college concerts and being on the Hootenanny TV show and all this stuff. And I was around a guy who was having number one records. So that was very interesting also. I was in the middle of something, and I knew it, but I just didn't know where it was going to go.
No one knew, but Don McLean felt it and wanted to be a part of whatever it turned out to be. Don McLean was very fortunate that his mother supported him doing whatever he chose to do.
My mother was Italian, and she was very proud. She loved to hear me play and sing. My father was the absolute opposite. He thought it was a complete waste of time. He thought that if I was going to be a serious young man and grow into a rational adult and the pillar of the community, that I was wasting my time with this singing and guitar stuff. When I was about 5 years old, I could sing. I grew up in a family of grown-ups. I had a sister who was 15 years older than me, and I had a grandmother and my two parents, so there were these four adults in the house. I was either coddled and beloved or I was in the way.
Nothing in between. Well, I guess that talks about the power of believing in yourself and the power of dreams and never letting go of what you want, doesn't it?
Well, you really hit on something very, very important. Because of the asthma, because I was home alone all the time, I was very lonely. I had nobody to relate to, and I created a whole other vocabulary, I guess, for myself that made me happy. It started with just loving the top 10 and the music. But I was different. I was much more involved with this stuff than the average kid was because they were more normal, and I wasn't. So I grabbed hold of this dream that I had. I started really playing guitar and banjo, and I got way into it. I practiced hours and hours and hours every day for years until I got good. And when that happened, then I had a weapon, the guitar, that I could use in order to put forward any songs that I might want to sing. And that led to arranging songs. I did everything on all my records. I wrote the songs, I wrote the arrangements. I did everything myself. So the guitar was my ally, and it was my weapon. I fell into a group of young singers, songwriters, men and women, who were playing coffee houses all across the country. They were opening up every place, and you could make $300 a night. Meanwhile, guys that I knew were still lifeguarding for $25 a week.
Must have been very appealing.
It was very exhilarating, very exciting, because these doors were opening and I was going through them. But I had no idea that it'd be 50 years later and I'd be worth an astounding amount of money. When I was about 13 years old, me and a bunch of friends went to see a movie, and I spent $6. And when my father found out I spent $6, he went crazy. That's how much money was worth in those days. I never saw a $10 or $20 bill in my life. My father paid for that house $7,000 that she bought in probably 1929 or 30, and he paid it off in 1960, just before he died. $7,000 he spent 30 years paying off.
You've seen a lot in the years, and it's just not the same world anymore, is it?
Well, that documentary movie, The Day the Music Died, the story of Don McLean's American Pie, was up for an MTV award. I am flying high right now. I have never been happier. I have never been more successful. And I don't think I've ever been more famous than I am right now.
The documentary does go into what was going on for you when you wrote American Pie. Can you share a little bit about that?
The song American Pie is so biographical. In the beginning, February made me shiver. I'm the paper boy. And then as we go along, I'm seeing this and I'm seeing that. And at the end, really, that with the Met a Girl Who Sang the Blues part, I was thinking about the March on Washington and how it was after it was over. Quiet, the rain had come, the tear gas had been used on everybody, and everything was quiet in the street. The political violence. There's a lot of bombing going on college campuses. You never knew when a bomb scare was going to get phoned in or one would go off. And I was around all that. So I was rough and ready, man. In fact, there's a movie about me called American Troubadour, a moment in there where I'm playing at Columbia University and there's a bomb scare. They stopped the show.
So does that mean that you always had to be on alert?
Yeah, because I'm a free radical rolling around. I'm a rambling man. I'm not a business. I put my ass on the line all over the place every time, all the time. Wow. I play in front of audiences in Northern Ireland, where people were in the audience who hated each other and they could have shot me in a minute. I played in many dangerous places. Just let it take me wherever it took me.
It was obviously your concern for everything that you saw going on around you that led to all those incredible lyrics throughout American Pie.
Well, all that energy and all that tumult is in those lyrics. That's something I built into the song. I really don't know how I do what I do. There's no way to describe how I do anything.
When you had put that song together, did you know you had a massive hit on your hands?
All I knew when Ed Freeman finished mastering that album, American Pie, I listened to that and I thought this is something very, very special. And I don't know what's going to happen with it. But luckily for me, United Artists bought the record company and put money behind it. And immediately they had a number one record with the cut down version. And we were off to the races at that point. The album went number one. The single went number one. Vincent went number 3, went number one all over the world. If it were today, they could have put out 2 more records and I would have had more hits off that record.
How did you feel when you weren't able to replicate the same sort of success?
I would say it was probably the biggest change in my life, without a doubt, for a whole variety of reasons. One is that the world changed. I didn't. You see, everything changed. So I was now almost like a rare bird. I wasn't a human being anymore.
How did that make you feel?
Well, first of all, back in New Rochelle, where I was born, I had failed to make anything out of myself when I quit school. And so I was thought of as kind of a loser, and here stories were being written about me being a millionaire now. So suddenly I was completely away from the pack. In one moment, who everybody thought was a loser became the biggest winner of any of the guys and girls who'd ever come out of that town. So it was a complete explosion. And everybody, of course, had their opinions, and some liked me and some hated my music. But you're in this maelstrom, and the thing that happens is that you have to start not caring about what anybody thinks or says. And that changes you. It makes you less sensitive. It has an effect on you. And I said, I'm going to deal with this. And the way I dealt with it was that I played solo for about 10 years, so I always made money. And I bought my own house, and as I said, I took care of my mother. So I never tried to live up to any big star image that was laid on me. In fact, I tried to pull back from it and be under the radar and find a nice sweet spot where I could not be under this crushing burden of this ridiculous image that people wanted to make for me. Yeah, I had a breakdown in 1974, and after that, I didn't let anybody, managers, agents, anybody push me. I thought, I will do it in a convenient way when it's comfortable for me. I will not do it because you want your commission on 5 more gigs. The lesson you have to learn. One of the things that happened to me is I fell in love with horses. Right after that breakdown, I got a horse called Papago Warrior, and he taught me a hell of a lot. And that pulled me right out of it. I forgot all about that other crap. Yeah. All I cared about, everybody in my career, they were always terrified I was going to get dragged home with a foot in the stirrup, dead. But I was always by myself, and I was really good at this. I had to do whatever I had to do.
So, Don, why did you decide to resurface come 1987?
Well, I never left the music industry. I just had a couple of glitches, but I was always working constantly. I never took time off. I've worked steadily for 50 years, except for the 2 years of the pandemic.
It was at this time that Don received his most meaningful accolade.
The city of New Rochelle, where I grew up and where I was thought of as a bit of a loser, started painting these enormous murals 150 feet high. And there's one of me on the side of the building. I cried when I saw that.
Don had finally achieved what he set out to do.
I wanted to be a romantic figure of some sort. My songs and my singing, traveling troubadour, that's me. So I created who I am, and I had this vision of who I wanted to be, how I wanted to look, how I wanted to dress, how I wanted to sound, what I wanted to say, how I wanted to sing, everything. I was always working on this, and I never varied.
Of all the songs that you've written and released, do you have a personal favorite?
Well, of my recordings, The covers of Since I Don't Have You and Crying, I think, are the two best records I ever made in my life. They just sound so gorgeous.
It'd be pretty hard to pick your favourite from 21 studio albums, 4 live albums, 11 compilation albums and 16 singles, wouldn't it? At 79, Don McLean is living his best life. He has a girlfriend 48 years his junior, with whom he still hopes to father a child. He also has a new album out. I don't understand where you take all the energy from. Share your secret.
Well, it's a focused kind of energy. Sometimes I'm quite tired. I don't smoke, but I have some booze once in a while. And then when I have to get my ass in gear and go on the road, I hit the trail. And everything happens. You start rocking and rolling, making music, and then the show gives the audience energy and gives me energy. And so
Don McLean is currently on the road in support of his new album, American Boys. It's taken him the best part of 4 years to complete.
The essence of that song was from something that my guitar player wrote, and he couldn't finish it. He gave it to me, and I sat on it for a long time, a few years. And then one day I figured out exactly what to do with it and rewrote the whole thing. That's kind of the plan that we had for several of the songs that we wrote together, and the rest of them I wrote myself. So once we got going, it took just a few months to put the whole thing together.
What were you hoping to get from the album?
I'm hoping to give pleasure, enlightenment, and excitement to people. I'm not hoping to get anything.
What sort of feel were you looking for?
I never know what I'm doing. I don't know how I do it. I don't know how I did it. I just get into something and I get it done. I have no idea what I'm doing. I make it up as I go along. The same thing with this.
Part of what you wanted to do was honour those rock and roll heroes that have come before you. Is that right?
Yeah, my producer created quite a number of these tracks from performances that I did into my phone.
Why did you even feel like you wanted to put more time into an album? You said you've already got 21 studio albums out. You're 79 years old. Why go to all the trouble of making a new album?
Well, it wasn't trouble. I like things that are absorbing and that capture my interest. I don't like sitting around. I like to have projects. And we had this movie, The Day the Music Died, the story of Don McLean's American Pie. We had spent 2 years on that. We had a bookazine which came out, which is my story and the story of the song. We had a children's book that we put out. We're coming out with another one now called Vincent, and we're going to have 3 more children's books. So there's always things that we're doing, and there's talking about now a Broadway show of some kind, because Broadway seems to be coming back to life. This would involve the same story, my life, all the things going on in America, that 10 years from 1960 to 1980. This year we are re-releasing in vinyl and CD, all remastered, 7 albums that I own, and next year another 7 albums. That's also happening.
Hey, Don, just come back to American Boys for me for a minute. It's got 13 original songs on there.
There's quite a bit of diversity on this record. There's a fun song called The Mexicali Gal, which is about my girlfriend. There's a song called You're the Meanest Girl.
That one's not about your girlfriend.
Oh, no. That's just a genre type thing. Yeah. I had fun with that one. There are many others, and they go in different directions. There's a song I like quite a bit called Marley's Song. It's got a chorus, Save yourself, whispered Marley. Your chains are much longer than mine. So there's quite a bit of stuff on there.
And in typical Don McLean fashion, each one very different to the next.
Yeah, but the one thing that's kind of nice is they all hit hard. They're all well engineered, and the tracks are very powerful. And I think the vocal performances.
Yeah. Your voice is obviously just as good today as it was when you first set out, or maybe even better.
Well, it's an interesting thing about being a singer. If you treat your voice right and you don't overdo it, and you only demand certain things from your voice when the voice is ready, and you actually build your voice. If you tear it down, which a lot of people do who don't know anything about singing, they end up not being able to sing anymore. And you have things like Bon Jovi talking about his atrophied vocal cord, and you have Miley Cyrus talking about her vocal cord operation. There's a lot of demands now placed on a performer. They've got to run all over the stage, and they've got to make all sorts of costume changes and every kind of thing. I mean, it's really quite a production. That's way too much for me. I just have my band, and I'm like one of those old guys, like Neil Young or Dylan or any of those people. We get on stage and sing the song. It's a lot less stressful and less expensive.
And you're still packing out the houses wherever you play anyway. So you said that you're always keen for the next project. When you told me that you were into horses and then you went through an architecture stage where you were into houses, is there another project on the cards?
No, I'm really very happy where I am right now. My girlfriend Paris and I are going to the White House for a state dinner.
Wow.
Which we've been invited to. We also may be going to Korea to do a big show. So there's some fun things. I'm willing to go anywhere in the world for big performances, but no more bus tours and theater tours.
Yeah,
I'm not doing them anymore.
Fair enough. You've paid your dues long ago. You say that period of the late 60s, early 70s was when the US was in such turmoil. Do you feel like what's old is new again, that we're going through all this turmoil one more time?
Well, I think it's going to be a whole different kind of turmoil, because now you see how there are so many institutions, especially the schools and governments, that have been infected with this kind of woke philosophy. And there's a lot of rot that we didn't have before. There's so much of watering down of standards. And on top of that, there's an enormous amount of drug use. And then we have this whole thing where we're looking forward, and young people can't really know how to get a handle on something. When I was a kid, I knew what I had to do to get into show business. Once I figured that out, it was doable. Now, I don't think anybody knows how this stuff works, except maybe Ed Sheeran. He figured it out somehow. There's a lot of sleight of hand going on now that I think is very confusing. Everything is a mystery for young people. Now you're hearing more and more that college doesn't even matter. So what does that mean? Very confusing and frustrating to young people who find that they're going to get old very quickly and not have a direction in their life. I always went in the same direction. From the time I was 15 years old, I was working on Don McLean. I was creating the Don McLean that I am, figuring out how to play the banjo, figuring out how to play the guitar, figuring out how to find songs to sing, figuring out how to get in front of an audience.
Yeah.
The good old days, we had a lot of things that we needed to learn, but I don't think it's a good idea to knock every single thing. I don't think that's healthy.
Don, you're known for writing about the things that you see around you that trouble you. You've just outlined a whole lot of them that trouble you now. Do you have any intention of writing about all of this in upcoming songs?
I'm still talking about race. I'm still talking about wars. I'm still talking about things that I about back then. So in some sense, a lot of stuff is still the same. But like I say, there's all this slippery stuff out there that you can't quite get a handle on, such as the mysterious future that young people have to deal with. How do you write about that? There's so many things that are just confusing. And I'm very happy that I did what I did with my life. I mean, I had a safety net. I could just as soon be homeless right now or dead. I've lived a long time, but I could be, living in some shelter somewhere, because just once you chose the direction I went in, there was no going back. That's what I wanted. I could see my whole life ahead of me in a way, and I could see that I wanted to be a romantic figure of some sort. And that's what I think being a singer and a songwriter and a travel musician is fundamentally. That's why we're different from normal people. But what I don't like is decadence. I've never liked this breaking instruments on stage and having, tractor trailers and all this ridiculous amount of stuff you got to haul around. That's not very romantic. That's very big business to me.
Don, is there one favourite song from your incredibly large catalogue that actually touches your heart most?
Maybe my version of Roy Orbison's song Crying. I related to the song. It's like an actor who understands a script or a part. I've done my share of crying, especially when I broke down. You know, my father died. That put me into a tailspin. Sometimes, you know, a relationship with a woman, maybe it was a wife or something that was going wrong that could put you into a terrible tale. It's awful, awful. And it's something you've never had happen to you before. And all of a sudden, everything is miserable. So you have to take care of yourself. You know, you have to stay away from people that hurt you. And you have to stay away and seek happiness.
Don McLean, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. God bless you all. I mean that.
Don McLean may have faded from the charts after that 1980 version of Crying, but his touring and recording has continued ever since. Thanks for your company today. I hope you've enjoyed the story of Don McLean. Can I count on you joining me again same time next week? I hope so, and I'll look forward to it. Bye now.